Hi and welcome to the What Pictures series Best Year in Cinema, where we look into actors who've had a legendary year in cinema history, usually releasing multiple films of significant cultural impact and box office success, and establishing or confirming their place in Hollywood. This episode we're going to look at Jim Carrey's 1994, which he began with a surprise hit in Ace Ventura Pet Detective. The Mask then incredibly topped the US box office on the 31st of July despite competing against The Lion King and Forrest Gump. And while that Christmas had a long forgotten number one song, Dumb and Dumber came out, and no matter what any critic's thoughts were on the film as a whole, they all had to acknowledge the genius of the combination of Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels. Now before getting into detail about 1994, let's start off with a quick look at Carrey's background. He was born in Canada in 1962 and was an energetic extrovert from an early age, going as far as to mail his resume at the age of 10 to the Carol Burnett Show. For anyone unfamiliar, that was a pioneering American sketch show which has certainly been more widely known today, and I guarantee you'll laugh if you check out some Tim Conway outtakes on YouTube. At age 13 to 14, if Carrey behaved during the school day, his teachers would let him do stand-up for his classmates. By 15, he was performing frequently in stand-up comedy clubs in Toronto, and by 17, he was opening for acts as established as Buddy Hackett and Rodney Dangerfield. His home life, meanwhile, had been completely uprooted, as his family was left with no other options than to live in a Volkswagen camper van and all take security and janitorial jobs, which meant an 8-hour after-school shift for the teenage Jim. Carrey headed to Hollywood as soon as he could, around 19 or 20, and immediately began making a name for himself on the stand-up circuit, impressing stars such as Damon Wayans with his repertoire of over 100 impressions, and his physically dynamic stand-up style. After acting together on Earth Girls Are Easy in 1988, Damon recommended Jim to his brother Keenan when Keenan was casting his new sketch show In Living Colour. That show, and outrageous characters like Fire Marshal Bill, who kept Watchdogs very busy with his extremely unwise advice,
boy, this new sprint line is really
brought Carrey's unique physical presence to a much wider audience, and one person in particular who'd proved to be crucial in his early career. That person's name is Tom Shadyac, a man who'd been Bob Hope's youngest ever joke writer, and had a grand total of one TV movie under his resume as a director. Shadyac himself had been a cheap, off-the-wall hire, and he had a similar name in mind for the role of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. At the time, the studio wanted Rick Moranis, and they may have got their way, but Moranis rejected the role, choosing to do the Flintstones and Little Giants instead. Judd Nelson, the edgy one from The Breakfast Club, was also considered. They even thought about rewriting Ace as female and casting Whoopi Goldberg. But there's one more person, and the fact he was anywhere near this film completely blew my mind. Alan Rickman. That's right, it's nearly impossible to imagine anyone but Jim Carrey as Ace, but Rickman's version is in a parallel universe I would do anything to get to. Anyway, Carrey was working 15 or 16 hour days on In Living Colour, and then would go afterwards to work on the script from midnight to about 4 AM. So if you factor in his improvisation too, there's no doubt that any other actor in the role would have ended up with a very different final film. Carrey was collaborating with the future writer-director of the sequel, When Nature Calls, a guy called Steve Odekirk, and described the process as two giddy idiots tossing jokes around. There are actually earlier drafts of the script online which show just how giddy these two idiots got, where they have insane scenes such as multiple beheadings, and a dream sequence where Ace was dismembered by pigeons. Carrey talked about his performance on Inside the Actor's Studio.
I based Ace Ventura off of a smart bird, a cockatiel or a parakeet of some kind. The clothing I picked was all, like a colorful bird, tropical bird. The walk was a bird, like everything was about a bird. When I spoke, it would be like, like birds do this, and that's right. Everything is with a little peck and a little, that kind of thing. Everything was based on a bird, even the hairstyle.
Ace Ventura Pet Detective immediately took the lead at the box office on its theatrical release, earning $12 million in its opening weekend and jumping ahead of Mrs. Doubtfire and Philadelphia. In fact, it nearly recouped its $15 million budget just off that first weekend in American cinemas. And what might be equally important is the 4.2 million home videos it sold in its first 3 weeks, back when Blockbuster was a thing. Carrey had signed up for The Mask prior to Ace's release and was paid $450,000 for the role. If you compare that to the $7 million he earned for Dumb and Dumber, which was released later that same year, you'll see the evidence of his whirlwind rise to stardom. And while Ace had been critically panned, The Mask had the critics singing a different tune, acknowledging Carey's screen presence and goofiness easily masks a fairly flimsy plot. And he was even nominated for a Golden Globe. Interestingly, Rick Moranis had also been up for the role of Stanley Itkiss. Don't worry, I'd forgotten that was a character's name too. As well as Martin Short, Matthew Broderick, and Steve Martin. Honestly, I can only see Steve Martin coming close to Carey's performance, but he was 49 in 1994, while Carey was only 32 and perhaps at his peak of hunger, creativity, and energy. I mean, let's be honest, can you even imagine The Mask with anyone else? And I say that knowing full well they'll probably make a sequel within the next few years with one of the kids from Stranger Things or Riverdale or something, but you know, we can hope that doesn't happen. The character of The Mask was based on a violent anti-hero in a dark comic book series, but the horror elements were sacrificed by the struggling production crew once they had Carey on board. By the way, those big teeth were originally only for silent scenes, but Carey taught himself to speak with them in, committing 100% to his vision of the role as always. He even did his own singing and dancing in the Hey Pachuco scene. Cameron Diaz didn't sing, by the way, but this is her first ever film role in a transition from modelling. Unbelievable. To quote the director of the film, Chuck Russell, "I saw Jim Carrey at the Comedy Store and was almost unable to believe my eyes at what he could do with physical comedy and his level of literally ingenious energy. I began to watch In Living Colour after I saw him at the Comedy Store, and I just said, there's this guy Jim Carrey and we need to make this a comedy. My list for The Mask included Nicolas Cage and Matthew Broderick, but really we wrote it for Jim. When Jim read it, he said, my god, it's like it's written for me. I said, it was. The list had Jim at the top, and the other guys." Another interesting anecdote Russell told was of a game he invented to keep up morale on the long days of shooting, where he would challenge Carey to perform a double impression. The example he used being John Wayne doing a Clint Eastwood impression. It's even harder than you think to do, by the way, there's not a chance I'm even trying. Anyway, New Line Cinema at their most optimistic had hoped for $30 to $35 million at the US box office, which would have made The Mask their highest grossing film ever at the time. It actually brought in $125 million domestically and $350 million worldwide. We'll link in the description to an interesting oral history by Forbes, by the way. They discuss things like why the sequel with Jim never happened, and how Carey's physicality actually saved them money on special effects. So Ace Ventura put Jim Carrey on the map, The Mask established him as a star worldwide, and with his third film of the year, Dumb and Dumber, he showed his instincts for selecting partners in front of and behind the camera. The Fowley brothers had spent years trying and failing to get a movie made before, by their own telling, they were finally given an opportunity to make one of their own ideas by Carey himself after their first meeting. At that point, they knew him only as the white guy from In Living Colour, but after Ace Ventura came out, his salary had to be renegotiated, from $700,000 to $7 million. I know it's not all about the money side of it, but it just shows they knew they'd struck gold. The casting of Jeff Daniels is a remarkable story too, as it was mostly due to the efforts of Carey. Daniels was then known primarily for his dramatic work, and the studio did not want him at all, going as far as to offer him only $50,000 for the job, and filming all of the duo's separate scenes in the first week of production, as they had a comedian on standby ready to replace Daniels at the first opportunity. Carey stood his ground, insisting that he needed a real actor to ground him in the scene. Daniels' own agents even insisted to him that the film would kill his career, and they made a last-minute call begging him to let them get him out of the contract, saying repeatedly that it would ruin his reputation as a serious actor, and that Carey would receive all of the comedic credit anyway. But Daniels stood firm and trusted his decision. Just quickly, this performance is what convinced the Fowleys that Daniels could play the part of Harry.
A scientific clinical test, a real thing. Whole lot of students with diarrhea. The doctors gave our group Pepto-Bismol.
On the topic of casting, Carey himself was not even the first choice for his part. Gary Oldman and Nicolas Cage were the actors originally envisioned for Carey's Lloyd and Daniels' Harry respectively, and Steve Martin and Martin Short get a second mention in this video as they both turned down the role of Lloyd. Eddie Murphy, Mike Myers, Chris Elliott and Rob Lowe had all also been in the running, and I have to apologise, I couldn't find out the name of the comedian they had waiting for Daniels to fail, but if you do know, and please stick it in the comments, we'll give you a shout out in the video down the line. Back to the box office, Dumb and Dumber also debuted at number 1 and grossed over $270 million worldwide, with famed critic Roger Ebert describing Carey as a true original and writing that the dead parakeet joke made me laugh so loudly I embarrassed myself. I just couldn't stop. And who could forget one of cinema's all-time great improv moments?
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Some of the context behind the sequel also speaks to what makes the original so great, as the Farrellys and Jeff Daniels have said they would have done one years ago, but that Carey only agreed to move forward after he randomly watched the movie in a hotel room. And according to Peter Farrelly, Jim called me, he was on the road, he was in a hotel room, and he turned on the TV and Dumb and Dumber was starting. He said he watched the whole thing and he called us and he said, I gotta do another one of these. I remember he didn't say how fucking funny it was. It was more like there's so much love between those guys. It makes me miss Jeff, it makes me miss you guys. I just love the feeling I get from watching this movie. We gotta do another one. Dumb and Dumber had actually been retitled during its development to A Power Tool Is Not a Toy. That was to try and get some financiers and producers to actually read the script, but it afterwards kickstarted the Farrellys in a big way. They've been ever present in the comedy landscape since. Films like There's Something About Mary, Shallow Hal, Hall Pass, and then they retired around 2012. No, they retired, Anyway, Carrey went into 1995 as a global megastar and a truly unique and exciting new actor, gaining acclaim for his dramatic turns in films like The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, while continuing to make us laugh like his roles in The Grinch and Bruce Almighty. Now, Carrey's legacy arguably may have been somewhat tarnished over recent years, with personal issues we're not going to get into, and the documentary Jim and Andy exposing his acting process and the hazards of being his co-worker, but that's a larger discussion for another time. For now, we just wanted to draw your attention to an undeniably momentous year in cinema history, when one of the most enduring and beloved actors of the last 25 years dropped on the world like a grand piano. Thanks very much for listening, and please check out our channel and our website to see what else we're up to, and for any of your videography or stock and drone footage needs.